Elizabeth Warren launched into a fiery rant against Wall Street greed, and Senator John Kennedy quietly reminded her who funds her campaign PAC. The hearing was about regulation dry, procedural, stacked with numbers. Mikan started naming names. She called Wall Street predatory, accused bankers of buying Congress, and framed herself as the only one clean enough to fight it. That's when Kennedy leaned in, flipped a single page in his binder, and asked a simple question. "Senator, who funds your super PAC?" The room froze. Warren blinked. The binder stayed open, and suddenly the narrative wasn't about greed. Anymore, it was about hypocrisy. Drop your age plus location. Let's see who still sees through the noise. She walked in with fire in her eyes. Elizabeth. Warren wasn't scheduled to speak that morning, not until late in the hearing. But as soon as the chair offered her an early slot, she seized it. The moment the mic was passed, the room braced. Wall Street is eating this country alive. No preamble, no policy jargon, just fire. It wasn't a question, and everyone knew this was a performance. Carefully timed, deliberately sharp, designed for TikTok cuts and Twitter reels. Warren launched into her monologue. These executives get rich by draining retirement funds, bankrupting communities, and lobbying for deregulation. And the worst part is, they do it with our blessing camera. Shutters clicked. Even the interns looked up from their phones. Warren pounded the table. Just once, for emphasis, we should not be asking how much greed Wall Street is showing. We should be asking how many politicians are being bought to look away. Now there was silence. She glanced briefly across the room, toward Senator Kennedy, who sat near the edge of the panel, half listening, pen in hand. Glasses low on his nose. She didn't call him out directly. She didn't need to. Everyone knew where this was going. She kept going. Wall Street spent $3.2 billion on political influence last year. That's not free speech. That's a hostile takeover of democracy. Somewhere behind her, an aide nodded. Mouthing perfect, they knew what they were doing. This wasn't just a Senate hearing, it was a stage, and Warren had rehearsed the opening like a courtroom closer. We let billionaires define the terms. We let hedge funds write the rules. And until this body grows a spine, they'll keep winning. 5 minutes, 5 sound bites, a masterclass in indignation, except she didn't realize who was waiting to speak next. The chair thanked her. The room settled. She capped her pen, adjusted her blazer, sat back with a faint smile. The kind that said, cut and post, that immediately, the gentleman from Louisiana. Kennedy didn't move right away. He adjusted his glasses, flipped one page in his notebook, then looked directly at Warren. Just once, and smiled. Not mockingly, not smugly, just enough to signal what was coming. And that's when the room changed, because everyone, including Warren, knew John Kennedy wasn't going to shout. He wasn't going to rant. He was going to cut dot. And when he did, it wouldn't be about Wall Street's crimes. It would be about who let them in the front door. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his eyebrows. He just opened the folder. Senator John Kennedy, known for his slow Southern rhythm and razor-wire precision, didn't waste time praising or condemning Warren's speech. He simply started reading from her own campaign finance record. Senator Warren, I appreciated your concern about Wall Street's influence. Let's talk about your own donor trail, not from a decade ago, but from the last cycle. One moved, the air tightened. Warren, trying to maintain composure, sat upright. Kennedy flipped to the second page in his folder, held it in the air like a receipt at the checkout line. This is a financial disclosure from ActBlue, dated October 7th. Your affiliated PAC, the Persist PAC, received $2.6 million that quarter. He turned the page. $1.1 million of that came from 3 investment firms, Cedar Hill Capital, Oaktree Holdings, and a strategic partner fund housed inside a JP Morgan subdivision. Kennedy paused. Are those small dollar grassroots donations? Senator Warren didn't answer. The room did, with stillness, because these weren't anonymous rumors. These were FEC filings, public records. Numbers Warren's own team had hoped would go unnoticed beneath the spotlight of her anti-corporate branding. Kennedy continued, tone steady. Cedar Hill, the firm that gave your PAC $500,000 last fall, also lobbied against 2 of the very financial regulations. You just scolded this room for weakening. Another page flip. Another document lifted, and this one's a fun one, from March of this year. A bundled donation from a policy group that, in its own mission statement, opposes SEC expansion and favors light-touch enforcement of hedge funds. He looked up now, directly at Warren. "Senator, if Wall Street's so evil, why do they keep funding your PAC? Don't doubt you're sincere in wanting better policy. But when you call everyone else bought and paid for, and then accept checks from the same folks you condemn," he stopped himself, closed the folder gently. "Well, ma'am, that's what the good people of Louisiana call token out, both sides of your mouth." No one laughed because this wasn't a punchline, it was exposure. The aides behind Warren started shifting. One of them quickly typed something on a phone, likely a message to the digital team. "Find context, get ahead of this." But it was already too late. The video feed was live, and more than 30 independent journalists, all watching the hearing. On C-SPAN and YouTube, clipped the moment before Kennedy even leaned back in his chair. "Senator, if Wall Street's so evil, why do they keep funding your PAC?" That line, crisp, cutting, and calm, was already racing across the internet. Warren, finally regaining voice, offered a tight reply. "Our PAC operates legally under current campaign finance law. We've always disclosed, sure." Kennedy nodded. "Legally, but not morally, by your own definition." Another blow, and it didn't matter how she responded next, because Kennedy had already accomplished what no one in that chamber had managed to do in years. He pulled the curtain back on the message and made the audience look at the machine behind it. By the time Warren left the chamber, her press team was already in damage control. The Kennedy clip had landed like a precision strike. Not messy, not loud, just lethal. "Senator, if Wall Street's so evil, why do they keep funding your PAC?" That sentence was being shared across every platform, not just by conservatives, but by independents, young progressives, and, most notably, disillusioned former Warren supporters. The TikTok cut hit 500,000 views before she even made it to her car. A 20-year-old political science major from Ohio posted a stitched reaction. Not angry, not cheering, just disappointed. She was the anti-corporate candidate, but that folder, those numbers, I can't defend that. Other reaction videos followed, not screaming, just pointing. She talks like she's broke, but her PAC eats with hedge funds. Kennedy just asked one question. She had 10 chances to answer it. Didn't. You can't preach reform and cash their checks. And then, in what would become the second biggest mistake of the day, Warren tried to tweet through it. At 4:43 p.m., right thing. It was meant to sound defiant, bold, framed as a rallying cry. But the replies told a different story. Because Wall Street hadn't responded, John Kennedy had, and what followed in the replies wasn't just trolling, it was receipts. Hundreds of screenshots flooded in. FEC filings, PAC transaction histories, bundler reports. Direct donation logs from investment firms she had just accused of corruption. One user, a campaign finance nerd with 3,000 followers, quote tweeted her with a single phrase, "Senator, this you." Attached, a screenshot of the $500,000 from Cedar Hill Capital. Another posted a carousel. Slide 1, her tweet. Slide 2, a clip of her condemning private equity. Slide 3, a list of her top 10 super PAC donors, 4 of which were PE firms. The backlash wasn't performative. It was surgical. Even members of the progressive media who normally backed Warren hesitated. One Substack newsletter headlined, "Warren's Wall Street rant was good until Kennedy made it honest." Another, "When populism is just marketing." The real damage, though, came from within her base. A viral post from a former Warren campaign volunteer read, "I believed in her because she said she couldn't be bought." Turns out, she just priced herself higher than most. That line hurt because it felt earned. Even supporters who tried to defend her were struggling. The contradictions weren't theoretical anymore, they were itemized. Meanwhile, Kennedy, he said nothing. No tweet, no Fox News appearance, no thread. He simply let the question sit where he left it, in public view, unresolved. And that silence gave it power. Because the more Warren tried to explain around it, the louder the original question echoed. Why do they keep funding your PAC? And what nobody on her team realized was this, that Kennedy didn't need to destroy her career. He just needed to make people read the fine print. And now they were. The list hit inboxes just after 6 o'clock. P.M. It wasn't public. Not yet, just an internal summary distributed to senior staff in Warren's communications and fundraising teams. A rundown of the Persist PAC's most recent donors and bundlers, grouped by industry. It was meant to help prepare response language. But the effect it had instead was detonation. Page 1 showed the usual suspects: public school unions, academic associations, digital grassroots platforms. But page 2 changed everything, because page 2 revealed that over $1.9 million had come from sectors Warren had just condemned by name: high-frequency trading firms, private equity coalitions, financial law lobbying groups, investment capital alliances, headquartered on Wall Street and not in past cycles. Not during the 2020 campaign. This was this year. This quarter, a junior staffer in the Combs bullpen saw the list and quietly muttered, "Jesus." The next 2 hours were chaos. One aide proposed a press release, reframing the donations as unavoidable side effects of open financing structures. Another drafted a blog post attempting to redefine Wall Street in narrower terms as megabanks, not firms or hedge funds. But they all knew the internet doesn't care about nuance. After a live contradiction has been televised, in one war room, a digital strategist tapped the table repeatedly and said, "We got Kennedy'd." He didn't shout, he just showed the math. At 8:15 p.m., someone on Warren's senior team made a mistake. They authorized a now-deleted post that read, "We don't accept corporate PAC money. Individual donations are public and regulated." That's transparency. But within 10 minutes, screenshots flooded back, names of CEOs whose bundled donations accounted for $500,000, hedge fund partner whose individual donation was filtered through a shell entity tied to 3 other super PACs, a New York finance group where 10 individuals all shared the same office address and family trust fund. And then came the blow no one expected. At 8:41 p.m., a Warren campaign aide mid-level, trusted and on the team since 2020, resigned publicly. She didn't do it with rage. She did it with a paragraph. "I joined this team because I believed we were the firewall between people and the powerful. But when we started splitting hairs to defend contradictions, I realized we had become what we campaigned against." She didn't name Kennedy. She didn't have to. The media picked it up within 30 minutes. Headlines like, "Warren staffer resigns after Kennedy clip goes viral. Senator faces internal revolt over PAC hypocrisy." This wasn't a scandal. It was a mirror. Back on Capitol Hill, Kennedy's office issued no statements. He was seen the next morning walking to committee with a cup of coffee and a manila folder, same stride, same pace, same glasses. A reporter caught up with him in the hallway. "Senator, any comment on the fallout from yesterday's exchange?" Kennedy sipped, smiled faintly, and said, "No, ma'am. I think the numbers said plenty," and kept walking. Inside Warren's camp, panic turned to confusion. The speech that was supposed to be her viral moment, the one crafted to show boldness, had become a boomerang. And worse, the damage didn't come from opposition research, deepfake edits, or cable news lies. It came from her own numbers. On a printed page, in a room she volunteered to speak in, and one senator, calm, quiet, and Southern as cornbread, had simply read them out loud. The student town hall was supposed to be a reset. Elizabeth Warren's team had chosen the setting carefully. Massachusetts University, friendly crowd, progressive faculty, controlled press access. No live stream, just a student newspaper and 2 handheld cameras. The event was billed as Future of Economic Justice, a conversation with Senator Warren. Inside the auditorium, things looked polished. Cheerful posters, iced coffee on every table, and a moderator, a soft-spoken economics professor, ready to keep things light. Warren opened with her usual rhythm, talked about economic mobility, the student debt fight, Wall Street greed, got a few laughs, a few claps. It was working. Until the final question, the moderator glanced at her note card and said, "Last one, then we'll let the senator get to her train." He pointed to a young man in the 3rd row. Black hoodie, thick, binder.com expression. He didn't smile. He didn't fidget. He just stood up and asked his question. "Senator, you said yesterday that you stand up to Wall Street, that you can't be bought. But Kennedy brought out your PAC donations. And I checked they're real. I've got them right here. He lifted his binder. The camera zoomed slightly. Warren stiffened. The room stilled. So my question is, if your PAC takes Wall Street money and your platform says Wall Street has too much power, what should we believe? Your message or your filings? No gasps, no gears, just silence, because every student in that room had seen the clip. They had re-watched the hearing. They knew the folder. The question? The moment. Warren took a breath. That's a fair question. She stopped, looked down, then back up. What matters to me is where I put my power, where I vote, what I fight for. The student didn't interrupt. I don't control every donation that comes through complex funding mechanisms, but I've always pushed back on corporate overreach, every single time. Applause, light and polite. But the student wasn't done. Then why did your PAC renew its Finance Alliance sponsorship just 2 months ago? Now the air cracked, because that wasn't a vague gotcha. That was specific, sourced, and he had the document in his hands. Warren faltered. I don't make every strategic decision inside Persist PAC. There are committees, compliance officers. I trust them too, but your name's on it. His voice wasn't loud. It was measured steady dot, and that made it land even harder. Warren looked to the moderator. He offered a soft rescue. We can move on. No, she said. He deserves an answer, but she didn't give one. Instead, she pivoted. We'll look into it. I appreciate you doing the research. The student nodded, sat down, but the crowd didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just sat there, processing the exchange. The moderator wrapped the event politely, thanked the senator, and the room slowly began to empty. But something had shifted. Not in chaos, in quiet disbelief. Outside the auditorium, a sophomore broadcast major went live on TikTok. Warren had a chance to clarify. To own it, she dodged, and the room knew it. Her video hit 100K in 4 hours. Later that night, screenshots from the student's binder, clear dated donation records, went viral. Again, and this time, there was no Kennedy in the clip. There was no southern drawl, no slow glass rebuttal, just a student, a folder, and a senator caught by her. Own words, no press conference, no tweet, no gloating interview. John Kennedy said nothing, and somehow that made his words echo louder. In the 72 hours after the town hall clip hit the internet, something odd happened, something that caught even Kennedy's own staff by surprise. He started trending, not because of what he said that week, but because of what he didn't say after. Voters, even skeptical centrists, began pointing out the contrast. One podcast host, a self-described moderate progressive, put it best: Kennedy didn't argue. He just opened a folder. Then he sat back and let the truth do its job. His co-host responded, "We're so used to politicians screaming their way through conflict. We forgot what it feels like when someone just tells the truth and leaves." Clips from the hearing re-emerged, not edited, not MED, just replayed. Senator, if Wall Street's so evil, why do they keep funding your PAC? That one line, steady, direct, became its own headline. Even people who disliked Kennedy's politics were now quoting him as the unintentional truth-teller of the week. The Washington Post published a Sunday column titled, "John Kennedy's Greatest Weapon Isn't Wit, It's Restraint." The piece broke it down cleanly. No interruptions, no cheap shots, no grandstanding, just a fact, followed by a pause, one sentence, a full stop. And now it was rattling the image Warren had built over a decade. More notably, Kennedy's name began popping up in places it usually didn't. A Gen Z voter thread called him the guy who keeps receipts. A libertarian influencer said, "I don't agree with him on much, but that was a masterclass in exposure." A progressive campaign strategist texted another, "I don't care what side you're on. If Kennedy comes for you with a folder, you're in trouble." And then came the post that went everywhere. It wasn't political. It came from a high school civics teacher in Georgia who shared a clip from the hearing with a caption. "Just showed this to my seniors. Told them, this is what accountability looks like when it's not emotional, just exact." The post went viral on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, crossing generations, crossing politics. And what made it hit wasn't just the message, it was the method. Because Kennedy never told America what to think, he just forced them to look. And in that silence, in that stillness, When Warren tried to pivot, when staffers tried to spin, when Twitter tried to interpret, the one sentence kept landing like a gavel, legally, but not morally, by your own definition. That quote started showing up in memes, in political cartoons, in college papers, and even in internal Democratic Slack channels where aides admitted they were tired of losing to folder moments. It wasn't just that Kennedy won, it's that he showed how quickly a brand collapses when the receipts don't match the story, and he did it all without raising his voice. She didn't say it again, not in her next speech, not in her next interview, not on her fundraising page, or in the emails, or in her town halls. The word was gone, unbought. It had been her brand, her badge, her rhetorical shield. She'd worn it with pride, with fire, with repetition, until Kennedy asked one question she couldn't answer without undressing the entire message. Senator, if Wall Street's so evil, why do they keep funding your PAC? That sentence broke the phrase in half, because now every time Warren's team drafted a line about standing up to billionaires, someone had to double-check the donor list first. Every time she rehearsed a jab at Wall Street, someone on her team had to ask, do we want to open that door again? She didn't apologize, she didn't retract, she just stopped, and the silence was deafening inside her circle. Staffers tried to shift focus to healthcare, to climate, to student debt, anything but the fundraising contradiction that refused to die. But every pivot was haunted by the folder, manila folder, the open binder, the quiet voice from across the room asking, legally? Sure, but not morally by your own definition. And that's what made it stick. It wasn't that Kennedy attacked her, it's that he used her own rules and let the facts finish the sentence. That's why voters didn't rage. They just blinked, paused, and started reading the fine print for the first time. Warren's donors noticed it. 2.1 high-profile progressive bundler reportedly told a friend, we're getting refund requests. Small ones, but constant, because people aren't mad. They're just done. Meanwhile, Kennedy returned to Louisiana. No rally, no viral tweet, no press conference, just a visit to a high school civics class in Baton Rouge. There a student asked him bluntly, Senator, how do you know when to speak and when to stop? Kennedy adjusted his glasses, grinned slightly. Son, if you say something true and it lands right, you don't have to repeat it. The teacher laughed. The class nodded, and Kennedy moved on. Online. The conversation shifted. It wasn't about left versus right anymore. It was about the cost of contradiction and what happens when someone shines a light under the hood of your principles. And that's why this moment wasn't forgotten, because the word Warren didn't say was louder than all the ones she did. If that moment made you think twice, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from.